The day my world fell apart began like any other. I walked into our apartment after a long day at work, still carrying the weight of the day's stresses. I dropped my bag on the couch, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight for the kitchen. That's when I saw a single text message from Mark. My heart skipped a beat as I unlocked my phone, half expecting it to be something routine. But no, this wasn't routine. It was devastating. Can't do this anymore. I've fallen in love with someone else. The words hit me like a freight train, tearing through every layer of my being. I collapsed onto the nearest chair, my legs refusing to support me. The metallic taste of betrayal flooded my mouth, sharp and biting. I had always prided myself on being perceptive, but somehow I had missed the signs, those late nights at the office, the mysterious business trips, the subtle shift in his touch. Now, standing there in the kitchen, I realized I had been living in denial for far too long. My entire future had crumbled in an instant, leaving me gasping for air. The apartment felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me like a prison. I grabbed a glass of water, but my hands were trembling so violently that I spilled it all over the counter. I tried to breathe, to think, but my mind was a chaotic storm. How could he? After 6 years of promises, laughter, and dreams shared together, how could he throw it all away like yesterday's garbage? The thought of Vanessa, his coworker, the woman he claimed to love now, made bile rise in my throat. She had always been there, hovering in the background, and I had dismissed her as harmless. But now, she was the reason for my downfall. The worst part was the emptiness. The void left behind by his betrayal was cavernous, swallowing me whole. I wandered aimlessly through our home, touching objects that once held meaning but now seemed foreign. The photo frames, the cushions we had fought over at IKEA, the ridiculous ceramic rooster he had brought back from a client meeting, all of them mocked me with their familiarity. Would he take these things with him? Would Vanessa even care? I couldn't bear the thought of sharing anything with her, not even memories. As I stood there, frozen in disbelief, the snow outside began to fall. Heavy flakes swirled in the air, blanketing the city in a serene silence. But inside me, there was no peace. Every noise, every creak of the floorboards amplified the ache in my chest. I had no idea how I would face tomorrow, let alone the rest of my life without him. For the first time in 6 years, I felt utterly alone. After discovering Mark's betrayal, I tried desperately to ignore the signs that had been staring me in the face for months. Each late-night text, each canceled date, each lingering glance at Vanessa, they all screamed betrayal. But I silenced them, convincing myself that love could overcome anything. Even as the cracks in our relationship widened, I buried my head in the sand, pretending everything was fine. That illusion shattered completely when I stumbled upon Mark's confession to Vanessa. In the days following, I felt like a ship adrift, searching for any anchor to steady myself. James, Mark's closest friend since college, became that lifeline. He had always been kind to me, listening whenever I vented about my frustrations with Mark. I convinced myself that spending time with James wouldn't hurt. It was just a casual drink to help me clear my head. But little did I know, this decision would unravel everything I thought I knew. When James invited me over for drinks, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, knowing that proximity to anyone associated with Mark would only reopen old wounds. Yet, I found myself accepting anyway, desperate for human connection amidst the chaos. That night, we talked about everything, our shared history, the flaws in Mark's character, even the possibility of a future without him. At first, it felt cathartic, like unloading a burden I carried for far too long. But then James's kindness began to feel different, almost intimate. It wasn't until later that I realized how dangerous this newfound closeness could be. James, who had always been supportive, had begun to look at me in ways that made my heart race. I brushed it off initially, attributing it to grief and loneliness. However, as the weeks passed, I couldn't deny the growing tension between us. One night, after a particularly emotional conversation, James reached out to touch my hand, and I froze. It was a fleeting moment, but it opened a door I hadn't known existed. What I didn't realize at the time was that this casual encounter would lead to a chain of events I could never have anticipated. My acceptance of James's invitation unknowingly planted the seeds of doubt in Mark's mind, fueling his jealousy and suspicion. By the time I discovered I was pregnant, James had already become a significant part of my life, and Mark's reaction to the truth would tear us all apart. The days following my discovery of Mark's betrayal with Vanessa were a blur of tears and disbelief. I wandered through our apartment, clutching a pregnancy test that had turned pink to unmistakable lines that confirmed what I already suspected. Pregnant, but not with Mark's child. This knowledge hit me like a thunderclap, splitting open a chasm of emotions I hadn't known existed. Guilt, panic, and confusion swirled together, threatening to pull me under. At first, I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that James, Mark's best friend, could also be the father of my child. We had shared a single night of vulnerability, a moment of weakness born out of loneliness and despair. Yet, that one night had rewritten the trajectory of my life in ways I never imagined. How could this happen? The thought of facing Vanessa, the woman Mark had chosen over me, made my stomach churn. And what would Mark think when he found out? Would he despise me? Would he hate James? The physical evidence of my pregnancy only added to the chaos. Morning sickness struck me like a freight train, forcing me to miss work for days. Each wave of nausea reminded me of the life growing inside me, a life I wasn't prepared to raise without Mark. At least that's what I had believed until now. My relationship with James had evolved from a fleeting encounter into something deeper, more meaningful. He had been there for me when Mark wasn't, offering comfort and support in ways I hadn't dared to hope for. But how could I reconcile these feelings with the guilt of carrying another man's child? One night, as I sat on the edge of our bathtub, staring at the pregnancy test in my hands, I broke down. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Why did this happen?" The silence in the room echoed louder than any answer I could have conjured. I had never intended for this to happen, yet here I was, faced with a reality I couldn't escape. The next morning, I forced myself to confront the truth. I dialed James' number, my hand trembling as I pressed the buttons. When he answered, his voice was warm, filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I'm pregnant." There was a long pause on the other end, and then he sighed deeply. "I'll be there soon," he said, and hung up. The news hit me like a freight train, barreling through the fragile walls I had built around my heart. As I scrolled through my phone one evening, I stumbled upon a picture of Mark and Vanessa in matching champagne-colored outfits, standing side by side at what appeared to be a formal event. The caption read, "We're engaged." My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the words. It was the image of them smiling, glowing, and radiating happiness together. They looked like a dream couple, and I felt like an intruder in my own life. I had spent months trying to rebuild myself after Mark's betrayal, focusing on work, friendships, and slowly allowing James to become a source of comfort and strength. But this announcement shattered the illusion of stability I had worked so hard to create. How could he move on so quickly? 8 months had passed since he walked out of our apartment, and here he was, ready to start a new chapter with someone else. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. Mark didn't love me enough to fight for us, and now he was throwing away the future we had built together without a second thought. The worst part was the comparison. Vanessa, the woman who had taken his attention away from me, was now standing beside him as his fiancée. She was elegant, poised, and confident, the exact opposite of how I had felt during those final days of our relationship. I couldn't help but wonder if she had been the reason for his distance, if her charm had blinded him to the love we once shared. The thought made my chest tighten with resentment and sadness. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mixture of anger and despair. How could he do this to me? Did he think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, did he expect me to celebrate their engagement like it was some kind of closure for me? The thought of attending their wedding, if they ever decided to have one, made my blood boil. How could I stand in the same room with them, knowing that Mark had chosen someone else over me? But then something shifted inside me. I realized that this wasn't about Mark anymore. It wasn't about proving to him or anyone else that I was okay. This was about me moving forward, embracing the life I deserved. I deleted the post and closed my phone, determined to focus on the future, not the past. James had been there for me through every low point, and I knew I owed it to him to give our relationship a chance. The months leading up to Mark and Vanessa's wedding were a whirlwind of emotions. As the date drew closer, James and I made our decision to attend, not to disrupt their special day, but to reveal the truth in a way that honored our dignity. The tension between us was palpable. Neither of us could deny the fear gnawing at our hearts. What if Mark exposed the truth prematurely? What if Vanessa discovered the baby wasn't his? We knew this wasn't just a wedding, it was a pivotal moment for both of us, a chance to reclaim our futures. Every detail of the wedding plan weighed heavily on my mind. I chose a dress that highlighted my pregnancy, a bold statement that would make it impossible for anyone to overlook the fact that Mark's child was not his. James and I rehearsed our roles countless times, practicing how to remain composed while standing in the same room as Vanessa and Mark. It was nerve-wracking, like walking a tightrope over a canyon. One misstep, and everything could collapse. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. My stomach churned with anxiety as I imagined the confrontation ahead. James held me close, his warmth grounding me. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, though even he sounded uncertain. I clung to his words like a lifeline, but deep down, I wasn't entirely convinced. Morning arrived, and we drove to the church in silence. As we entered, the weight of history pressed down on me. People remembered me as Mark's longtime girlfriend, the woman everyone assumed would eventually replace Vanessa. Now, here I was, heavily pregnant, on the arm of Mark's former best friend. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the significance of the moment. We took our seats near the back, hoping for anonymity, but there was no escaping the scrutiny. Mark's mother spotted me immediately, her eyes widening when she saw my condition. She approached cautiously, her face a mix of curiosity and calculation. "Congratulations," she said, her tone polite but tinged with suspicion. I smiled, though my insides churned. Beneath the surface, I wondered if she suspected the truth. As the ceremony began, I watched Mark exchange vows with Vanessa, his expression soft yet distant. A strange sense of closure washed over me. This man, who had once promised me forever, was now promising it to someone else. My heart ached for the loss of the dreams we had shared, but it also hardened with resolve. Today, I would reclaim my story. The wedding venue was a grand, historic church with towering stained glass windows and polished wooden pews. As I stood at the back of the aisle, my hand resting lightly on James's arm, I watched Mark approach Vanessa at the altar. His smile was bright, but it faltered when his gaze landed on me. The congregation was seated in silence, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Then I felt it, a ripple of recognition pass through the crowd as Mark's eyes locked onto my pregnant belly. His face paled, and for a moment he froze. His jaw clenched, and his hands twitched nervously at his sides. I had expected this moment to be difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for the raw emotion that swept across his features. Vanessa, blissfully unaware, continued exchanging vows with Mark, her radiant smile untouched by the chaos unfolding behind her. But Mark couldn't hide his distress. His eyes darted between my stomach and James, searching for answers that were plain to see. Finally, he turned to his mother, who had been chatting animatedly nearby. Her eyes widened as she noticed my condition. 7 months, James said evenly, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the ceremony. She's 7 months pregnant. Mark's face contorted in a mix of disbelief and anguish. The realization hit him like a freight train, shattering the illusion of a perfect union. He stumbled back, his hands covering his face as if trying to block out the truth. For the first time, he couldn't feign ignorance. The man who had once been poised and confident now looked vulnerable, caught in a web of lies and deceit. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark, who had always prided himself on being in control, was now the one whose world was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Vanessa's confusion grew as she followed his gaze, her hand tightening on his arm. "Mark, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. He didn't respond, unable to articulate the betrayal coursing through him. His mother excused herself abruptly, muttering something about needing air. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to slice with a knife. Mark's mother returned moments later, her face pale. She approached me, her eyes flickering between my face and my stomach. 7 months, she repeated, her tone accusing. "How long have you known?" Her words were sharp, but there was something else in her expression, a hint of resignation, perhaps, or even reluctant admiration. Mark's face burned red with shame. He had been exposed in front of everyone, his facade of perfection torn apart. The man who had walked into the church with a promise of forever now stood there, exposed and vulnerable, realizing that the life he had built was a lie. For the first time, I pitied him, not because of his actions, but because of the person he had become. The revelation hit me like a gut punch. In the dim light of the anteroom, surrounded by the echoes of the wedding festivities, Mark confessed something I hadn't expected. "I didn't love you enough," he admitted, his voice strained, as if the admission physically pained him. "Not enough to fight for us, not enough to keep you." The words sliced through me, sharper than any blade. I had always believed that the love we shared was enough, that it could weather any storm. But now, standing here in the aftermath of his betrayal, I realized how wrong I had been. His confession wasn't just about the past. It was about the future he had planned without me. "I knew I was going to leave you long before I told Vanessa," he continued, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It was part of my plan all along. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. I didn't want to hurt you, but I did. And I'm sorry." The apology was hollow, a mere formality. The damage was done. My heart, once whole, now felt fragmented beyond repair. The admission was devastating. Not only had he betrayed me, but he had also manipulated the timeline to suit his needs. He had orchestrated our breakup like a chess game, sacrificing me in the process. The realization that I had been nothing more than a pawn in his grand design made me feel worthless. The man who had once promised me forever was now admitting that he had never truly loved me. The thought of all the sacrifices I had made for him, the moves to new cities, the support through law school, the dreams we had built together felt like a mockery. I had given him everything, and he had thrown it all away without a second thought. The worst part was the humiliation. Standing there, listening to his confession, I felt stripped bare, exposed not just to him, but to everyone who might overhear. The pain was magnified by the knowledge that this wasn't just about me. It was about all the women who had trusted him, including Vanessa. How many others had he played like puppets, stringing them along until they were used up? The thought made my blood boil. Yet, despite the anger and the pain, there was a strange clarity in his admission. For the first time, I understood the full extent of his betrayal. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the calculated manipulation that had preceded it. He had planned his exit meticulously, ensuring that I would be blindsided when the time came. The realization was sobering, forcing me to confront the truth about the man I had loved. The months that followed Mark and Vanessa's wedding were a whirlwind of emotions and milestones. James and I worked tirelessly to rebuild our lives together, navigating the challenges of pregnancy, work, and the occasional awkward encounters with Mark and Vanessa. Despite the pain of the past, there was an undeniable joy in building something new. Each ultrasound, each kick from our growing baby brought us closer together, solidifying the bond we had forged through shared struggles. James proposed in the quiet of our new home, a gesture that caught me completely off guard. He held up a vintage sapphire ring, its sparkle catching the moonlight streaming through the window. "I don't want to rush you," he said softly, "but I don't want you to think this is just because of the baby either. I've loved you for years, long before you and Mark ever got together." My heart swelled with emotion as I said yes, knowing this was the man who had been there for me through every low point, who had held me when I cried, and who had shown me what true love looked like. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended only by close friends and family. The ceremony was held in the same church where Mark and Vanessa had tied the knot, a symbolic nod to the path that had led us here. As I stood at the altar, clutching James's hand, I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a rebirth, a chance to rewrite the script of my life. Emma Grace arrived 3 months later, a miracle wrapped in blankets, weighing 7 pounds and 4 ounces of pure perfection. James cut the umbilical cord with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. When they placed her on my chest, her tiny body warm against my skin, I felt something lock into place inside me, a certainty, a rightness I had never known before. "She's beautiful," James whispered, his finger caught in her surprisingly strong grip, just like her mother. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm after that. James took paternity leave, insisting on being present for every moment of those precious early weeks. Friends and family celebrated Emma's arrival, and my sister practically moved in for the first week, cooking meals and doing laundry while James and I navigated the fog of new parenthood. But even as we built our little family, there were moments when the past crept in. Seeing Mark or Vanessa would send a pang of sadness through me, a reminder of the road not taken. I often wondered if the choices I had made had been the right ones, if the pain I had endured had been worth it. Months after the wedding, Mark and Vanessa announced their move to Chicago for Vanessa's new job. The news hit me like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would learn from the mistakes I had made. As I watched them pack their lives into boxes, I wondered if they understood the gravity of what they were walking into. They had rushed into their relationship, skipping over the necessary steps that could have strengthened their foundation. But deep down, I also knew that each person had to take responsibility for their own choices. Mark had walked away from our relationship with ease, believing he could replace me with someone else. Vanessa, too, had been complicit in the whirlwind romance, ignoring the warning signs that had been clear to everyone else. I couldn't help but feel a strange kinship with them, a shared understanding of the chaos that had consumed us all. Their move to Chicago felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one that might allow them to reflect on the choices that had led them here. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that they were repeating my mistakes. The haste with which they had committed to each other mirrored my own impulsive decisions. I had fallen for James without fully processing my emotions. just as Mark had fallen for Vanessa without recognizing the consequences. I hoped that the distance between us, Chicago was a world away, would give them space to grow, to learn, and perhaps even to heal. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I had learned. I had once believed that love was enough, that it could conquer all. But now I understood that relationships required effort, communication, and trust. Mark and Vanessa had chosen to leap before looking, and I hoped they would realize the importance of slowing down. Their journey was theirs to navigate, just as mine had been mine. Despite my hopes, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Watching them leave reminded me of the person I used to be, the insecure, clingy version of myself who had put too much faith in someone else's ability to complete her. I have learned that true fulfillment came from within, not from external validation. As I waved goodbye to Mark and Vanessa, I felt a strange sense of closure, knowing that their departure marked the end of an era for me. The day of Emma's baptism was a blur of joy and anticipation. My sister and James's brother stood as godparents, their faces beaming with pride as they held my daughter during the ceremony. The church was filled with family and friends, the spring sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on Emma's delicate christening gown. It was a moment steeped in tradition and meaning, one that I had long dreamed of sharing with those I loved. As the priest began the ritual, I felt a lump in my throat. Emma, nestled comfortably in James's arms, was oblivious to the significance of the occasion. Her tiny fingers flexed gently, and I caught sight of Mark and Vanessa slipping into the back row just as theirs commenced. My heart skipped a beat. Their presence was unexpected, and for a moment, I wondered if they had come to stir up trouble. But then, as Vanessa's eyes met mine, I saw something unexpected, a flicker of genuine warmth, a hint of sincerity that I hadn't anticipated. After the ceremony, they approached us cautiously, Vanessa cradling a small silver rattle that she had gifted Emma. "Congratulations," Mark said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "She's beautiful." Vanessa nodded, her eyes lighting up as she peered at Emma in James's arms. "Absolutely stunning," she murmured, her tone soft and sincere. For a brief moment, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie with them, a shared acknowledgement of the journey we had all traversed. Their visit wasn't just about the baby, it was about closure. Mark's face softened as he watched Emma, his expression tinged with nostalgia. "You look happy," he said to me, his tone tinged with something I couldn't quite identify, a mixture of regret, relief, and perhaps even hope. I nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions swirling inside me. Here they were, the couple who had once occupied such a central role in my life, now reduced to figures on the periphery. Yet, despite the distance, I couldn't deny the connection that still bound us. Vanessa handed Emma back to James, her movements careful and deliberate. "She's a natural," Mark commented, his eyes lingering on James's face. "Planning on kids of your own?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Vanessa shot him a quick glance, her smile fading slightly. "We're focusing on careers right now," she said, her tone measured but tinged with a hint of longing. As they left, I watched them walk away, their presence lingering in the crisp spring air. I realized then that, regardless of their new lives, they would always occupy a part of my story and I theirs. Their return wasn't about reopening old wounds. It was about acknowledging the ties that remained unbroken. In the end, I found solace in the truth that every trial I endured had shaped me into the person I was meant to be. Though the pain had once felt unbearable, it had taught me resilience, deepened my capacity to love, and showed me how to embrace each moment with purpose. The betrayal, the heartache, the shattered dreams, they had all been stepping stones, leading me to the life I now cherished with James and our daughter Emma. Looking back, I realized that the very things that had once broken me had also made me stronger. The emptiness I felt after Mark left had driven me to seek solace in new beginnings, pushing me toward James, who had been patiently waiting for me to see him clearly. Our journey together had not been easy, but it had been transformative. The vulnerability I had once feared had become a source of strength, allowing me to open my heart fully to James and Emma. The lessons I learned from my past were invaluable. I had come to understand that love wasn't just about passion. It was about growth, trust, and unwavering commitment. The pain of losing Mark had forced me to confront my fears, but it had also given me the courage to pursue my dreams and embrace new opportunities. James, with his steady presence and unconditional support, had been my anchor during those tumultuous times. Today, I stand tall, knowing that the hardships I endured were not in vain. They have prepared me for the joys of motherhood, the beauty of unconditional love, and the profound peace of finding oneself. As I watched Emma sleep peacefully in her crib, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her tiny fingers curled around my finger reminded me of the fragility and strength of life itself.